Infratil has owned some of the country's most significant assets, including where I'm standing now, Wellington Airport. It's made shareholders double-digit returns doing it. But for how long can those returns last?
It is a growth stock. And
Still?
Yeah. And yes, it's returned 18-19% over the last 30 years. But the investments it's got in the sectors that it's in, it is still a growth story.
From 1994 to 2024, Infratil has owned major assets that are household names here and overseas. Its best investment to date was the port of Tauranga, where it made 6 times its money, and fuel company Z Energy, which returned 5 times its money. Its first international investments were in European airports. That didn't go so well.
And they were bad.
Sold them for what, $2 New Zealand each?
£1, yeah. But that was a mess.
Lloyd Morrison is the chairman of Morrison, the investment firm that manages Infratil for an annual fee. His brother Lloyd started Morrison and then spun out Infratil to the public market when he saw opportunity in infrastructure and utilities. At the end of 1995, Infratil had investments in 5 assets. Now it has 15. 60% of those are overseas. Over 30 years, the company has averaged an annual return of 18.7% to shareholders after tax, well above the total NZX Top 50 index return of 7%.
It's a credit to all the people that are involved in the organisation, so it doesn't happen by chance. And I think one of the things is that Morrison, as the manager, has maintained the culture, it's maintained its investment style, it's maintained the way it goes about investing, and that's, it is a remarkable record. It's very, very hard to go out there anywhere and find a 30-year 18-19% return. It really is difficult.
Lloyd passed away from leukemia in 2012, aged 54. That's when Rob stepped in. He was no rookie to investing though, having advised the float of Air New Zealand in the 80s. You carried on his legacy, as did the others here. What obligation did you feel to lead Morrison after him?
Well, he asked me. He asked me at one point to go on the board of Infratil. I said no, didn't want to be on a listed company. He asked me to chair Morrison if he didn't survive, and I said no. I said, you're going to survive, so let's not even talk about it. So it sat there for a while, but I was still working on the basis he was going to survive, and he was certainly working on the basis he was going to survive. So, but he talked to me quite a few times about would I take over if he died, and so yes, I did. I've always felt that I wanted to help preserve his legacy. And the best way to do that is make sure that the company's successful. But really, the success of Morrison and Infratil has been about the management. It's been about an incredibly talented management team, and in a small number of people. You've had Lloyd being the CEO of Infratil, Marco, now Jason. It's a very small number of people over 30 years. There aren't many listed companies that could say, okay, we've only had 3 CEOs, for example.
You heard from Infratil's existing CEO, Jason Boyes, in part 1. Now you're going to meet Marco Bogoyevsky. He was the second CEO of Infratil and the longest standing between 2009 and 2021. It was under his tenure that Infratil investors made most of their money.
I think probably the proudest thing, if that's what you're really asking, is probably the taking on what Lloyd Morrison started and turning it into what it is today. It's just a shame he's not there to see sort of the outcome, if you like.
Marco led a significant shift, getting Infratil's investments out of transport and into digital infrastructure, including its dominant data centre play and its acquisition of One New Zealand.
I think we were always looking for the next sort of we used to think of them as verticals. So the next industry that you could really identify where you could invest and swim with the tide. So I know it sounds like a cliche, but investing's hard enough, right? So if we try to find whole like demographic trends and other trends that were very positive for infrastructure investment, and data growth was obvious sort of 20 years ago to everyone, not just to Morrison. But we sort of looked behind that and said, well, what sort of infrastructure would you need to support that sort of growth in the future? Some of it's sitting inside these integrated telcos like One, and some of it was sitting inside these next generation data centers. And so we managed to access them, and we just rode the tide. And I think there's a few other sectors coming, health probably the next one. But we could have been wrong as well. We could have been very wrong.
Did you ever think that? Were there ever any moments behind closed doors where you thought, if we spend hundreds of millions of dollars on this, it actually might not work? And you'd get roasted by investors if that was the case.
I think we have sort of reasonable doubt in just about everything we do, even though we've got quite strong top-down research of our own, so we don't rely on other people's work. I think the thing is not so much that idea was wrong, it's more that the combination of the specific starting point, where we accessed it, how the management team involved with it. That could have gone wrong. I mean, stuff happens all the time, right? And the one thing about the Infratil portfolio, and this might come up, is it's a high conviction portfolio. And again, that's a much used term, but if you look at the composition today of the Infratil portfolio, it's not how you would classically design an infrastructure portfolio, right?
It's not very diversified.
No, it's heavily overweight digital infrastructure and renewable energy. So as it happens, those two things work quite well together, and I think it's still actually a very strong positive outlook. But it's not a classic portfolio construction. So, it's always been an absolute growth, total return vehicle, and that's actually what Lloyd, that was his mandate, right? It's sort of get high conviction, find the best accessible starting point you can, which is usually a management team, and then sort of double down and build these development platforms where you can. And so it worked, Thank God it worked.
From the outside, Infratil always seemed like an unstoppable force, doing deals with enormous institutional investors and superannuation funds. But Marco says it was commonly chaos behind closed doors, including on its biggest deals.
I don't know if you remember the Shell. We bought Shell's...
That was early on?
Yeah, New Zealand's downstream assets.
Which became Z Energy.
Which became Z, yeah. That was 2009. That was when the markets were crapping themselves, and they had an offshore owner who actually wasn't that fussy on what they realised for it. And we just saw opportunity. We bought that with the super fund. We actually didn't have the cash to buy it. We sold our position in Auckland Airport, which is a listed position. We stitched up a deal with the New Zealand super fund to buy the other half. There was a lot of hand-wringing in the background. That was only 400 mil, and we did half of it. So it wasn't huge in today's context, right? But we were scrounging, and looking at every empty drawer for that 200 mil to fund our share of it. And the funny story about CDC is we missed out on CDC 2 years earlier.
How much cheaper?
Half the price.
Oh,
so
Marco. Oh.
Yeah, that's what we thought. So, yeah, we could have bought it. We ended up paying 400 mil for our half of that asset.
But you could have paid 200 mil.
2 years earlier.
And you know how much it's worth now?
Yes.
Almost 5 billion.
Well, Infratil shares worth 5 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole thing's worth 10. So anyway, so we were competing with a private equity firm called Quadrant, who are a very successful Aussie PE. They won that first deal. They held it for a short period of time. We bought it off them a couple of years later because we still loved the asset, and it was we thought the best positioned asset in this part of the world.
You may recognise Marco from his telecom days, where he was the Chief Financial Officer alongside then CEO Teresa Gatting. That's where Lloyd Morrison took notice of him.
Telecom at that time was probably the most hated entity in New Zealand, I would say, even though it was about half the stock market. And we had just gone through that regulatory shift with separation. And yeah, I'd resigned and didn't have a role. I got an email from Lloyd saying, I actually didn't know Lloyd, and literally he said, I've still got the email, which I can show you later. hi, I'm Lloyd, you don't know me, I know you, we need to talk. And by the way, your telecom service is shit. Is literally all he said in his email.
What did you say back?
Well,
Thanks.
thanks very much. Yeah, exactly. So we agreed to talk. I knew enough about Lloyd that, that's the way it is, right? Actually, that is literally the way he was, right? He actually thought the service was shit, right?
At least he was honest.
He was here to tell you, and he, I met on the terrace. There was an old building that Morrison Co had up there, and we had a chat with himself and another guy called Bruce Harker, who's a name you might not have heard of, but he's hugely instrumental in Morrison's success. He's not involved in the firm today, but I just want to make sure he got a mention because he was a big part of getting my attention, but also working well with Lloyd and myself and others. And yeah, Lloyd didn't have anything specific in mind. He basically used this power of persuasion to say, look, I haven't got a role, I haven't got a job for you. You need to join us though, and we'll figure it out later, basically is what he said.
And you agreed?
And I agreed, yeah. He was very persuasive.
Clearly.
Yeah, he sent me an employment agreement, reluctantly. We had this funny thing where he sent it to me, and I thought you'd do what you normally do, which is, look at it, mark it up, send back a few comments. He said, I'm not changing it, I sent it to you first. I said, okay, well, I'll sign it. And then he asked me to do one of those personality tests. I said, I'm too old for a personality. I'm not doing any tests. And so he conceded on that one. So after about like a week of banter and, each agreeing not to do what the other person asked, we actually ended up getting a role. He called it COO. It had no people responsibilities, no clear accountabilities. I didn't even have a desk, and I think when I walked into Morrison & Co, because you were basically a Morrison employee, there were a few questions about how it was going to work. And this is, mid-08 we're talking about now, so before Lloyd became ill. And actually it was hilarious. I mean, he's so strong-willed, right? He surrounded himself with good people. There's a lot of people you would have known and met. And they've had a lot of success. And they actually had the option of sort of incrementally moving along. But Lloyd, I think, said to me, one of the first things he said to me was that, I think we're onto something here. And he was actually talking about Morrison probably at that stage more than Infratil. But in his own words, I don't know how to scale it. Which is sort of interesting, right? For a guy that's a massive peacock, huge personality, you'd walk down the street and everyone would sort of know him and talk to him. He was...
That's a very honest thing to say.
Yeah, I was really impressed, actually. I think he was saying, I know that I need to put certain things in place. He wasn't talking about succession, by the way. He wasn't talking about stepping down. He wasn't talking about any of that. He just said, I need help to grow this thing. And, which I thought, that really impressed me. From a what was, a great starting point, but quite a small entity at that point. And so we set it off. And the first 6 months were a bit chaotic, to be honest, because I was trying to find out what the hell was going on in Infratil and Morrison.
And what the hell you were meant to do, because you didn't really have a job.
Yeah, I didn't really have a role. Yeah, so it wasn't... I actually thought, at one stage I thought that there was a chance it might not work, right? Because it was just, I'm not that process-oriented, but I need a little bit of structure,
Having gone from a corporate like telecom, a beast, into this chaotic...
I mean, that was the attractive thing, to be honest, that you were going into that more, less structured environment. But it didn't look like there was room. And then he became ill. January 09, he was on vacation. He gave us a call and said, I've had this diagnosis, I'm going to take some time off. And by the way, here are the keys, Keys to what? Well, here's the keys to Morrison, to Infratil, to the whole thing.
What followed speaks for itself. Infratil's market capitalisation has gone from $50 million at its IPO to more than $10 billion today.
It is a growth stock. And,
Still?
Yeah. And yes, it's returned 18-19% over the last 30 years, but the investments it's got in the sectors that it's in, it is still a growth story. And that's the thing to me is still really exciting about it.
So it's not too late to buy in, Rob?
I can't say.
The Morrison firm and Morrison family jointly own about 5% of Infratil today. They've been buying the stock in recent years.
I look at Infratil, I look at Morrison and I go, we've barely started. There's so much more to come.
Marco is still involved as an operating partner at Morrison, but also has his own venture capital fund, investing in earlier stage companies.
Health is that next sector, I think. If I was running Morrison today, I'd still be pushing on. Now, we have started, right? We took early positions in retirement, and that was around a view on demographic trends. Blokes like me getting close to living in a retirement home.
You're way off here, Marco.
I'm getting closer, much, much closer. We diagnostic imaging through Pacific Radiology and Q-Scan. The challenge, so those are all, they're actually all good investments. The issue for us at Morrison Infratil now is that they have to scale to a certain size to be relevant for the portfolio. So that's the tricky part. And fortunately, I think the health sector in New Zealand is big enough, actually can afford that scale. So I wouldn't rule that out. But it could be in other areas that you don't sort of think of, like, cancer care sort of grows naturally out of diagnostics. And then some of the facilities you need to deliver accessible healthcare require a lot of investment.
Healthcare is an industry Lloyd Morrison knew all too well. What's one thing you wish you could show him now and say, look what we did?
I think it would be the global push. I think Lloyd would have done it, but I think he probably would have been more cautious about doing it. So I think being able to show him that we could take what he established and grow it internationally would be the thing. And I think that's what he'd be really proud about, is that it has grown into this big international business. And it's not well known as an international business, it's not. But although increasingly it is in the infrastructure sector. But I think showing him that actually what he thought was capable, we've demonstrated as a proof point. I think that's probably. And I think the other thing is that we've sort of kept this. We've tried to keep the same values. And I think he'd be pretty happy about that, I reckon. He loved an argument. He and I used to argue all the time, but he loved an argument, and that's part of the sort of magic sauce here. You've got to be capable of arguing your point, holding your ground, and pushing what you believe in, and that's important. No one's a pushover.
As I have learned.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rob. I appreciate your time.
I had a much better wine collection than Lloyd.
Did you? Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, now it comes out.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
He knew it too. But
did he? But he never admitted it because he's not a pushover.
No, he did. He did admit it. He used to enjoy drinking some of it. Yeah.
Thanks for watching Markets with Madison. If you enjoyed this interview, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. I do all of the research for these episodes myself, so your support means a lot. I always love to hear your feedback and ideas, so please drop any thoughts in the comments below. Now go put your money to work.